What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to Hyperchat number 7. I'm here at BetaWorks in the West Village with Sam Korus, who's an analyst from ARK Investments. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we have a ton of exciting stuff to cover today. You, per my understanding, work for ARK mainly focused on researching batteries, electric vehicles, so tons of Tesla stuff to get to. But before we get to that, I was wondering if we could get a quick intro on your background and what brought you to working at ARK and researching this space.
Sure. So at ARK, I focus on batteries, electric vehicles, also automation and robotics, alternative energy, and space exploration. So definitely touches a lot of areas where Musk is active, but definitely exciting areas in general. My background is I studied cognitive science at the University of Pennsylvania. And so the area that I really focused in on was computation and cognition. And so really loved researching, staying on the cutting edge, and looking for job opportunity. Came across ARK, and really couldn't ask for a better fit of doing original research, and then loved the open source ethos of it, where we're putting out the information. Love to get feedback, and so that's how I wound up there.
And have you personally? Are you an investor yourself, or were you much of an investor, or did you come at this more from the technology side?
Really came at it from the technology side, and then learned the investing side from Kathy Wood, who's the CEO, CIO, our director of research as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true for maybe not everyone at ARK, but a lot of people at ARK have industry expertise in the area where they're working and covering, which is definitely very unique and good to have.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the problems of most of the analyst situations, that they're all finance people. None of them are experts in what they're actually covering, and that's kind of like a huge disconnect. Maybe what we're seeing with Tesla, maybe not. But anyway, one of the main things that you actually brought up just when we were talking just now is something called Wright's Law, which I think is a great way to frame the conversation we're going to have today, which is essentially this theory that the more resources that get put into manufacturing of something, the cheaper it will become, and through the lens of electric vehicles and batteries, and then becoming cost competitive with the internal combustion engine. So maybe could you give us just a brief rundown of Wright's Law, because I know you're going to have a better definition than me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes to the whole kind of EV debate that's out there, is really how many EVs are going to be sold. Mm-hmm. And I think, a lot of people disagree on that. And if you come to an understanding on that point, then I think a lot of people's different opinions start to make more sense. And so the way that we've constructed our research is based on Wright's Law, which is a cost decline model. And so what it is, for every cumulative doubling of production, you get a certain percent cost decline. And so for electric vehicles, the single biggest component of an electric vehicle, as far as cost goes, is the battery. So we're looking at kilowatt hours produced. And so that's what's on the x-axis. And so, if you're looking over time, how many kilowatt hours are produced, you get a 18% roughly cost decline for every cumulative doubling in production.
Wow.
And so the interesting thing with this is that, on that basis, very consistent throughout history. But if you look on the x-axis and you're just measuring time instead, the curve is not nearly as smooth. And so what happened with that is, if you go back to 2015 and you look at OPEC or the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, and you look at what they're forecasting for EV sales in the early 2020s, they were saying there was going to be 100 to 200,000 EVs sold globally.
Wow.
In the early 2020s.
Uh-huh.
Right? So this is crazy. One, Jay, for context, I'm sure everyone's listening is an EV fan, but in 2018, there was just below 1.5 million EVs sold.
Wow.
Right? So totally off the mark.
Mm-hmm.
And they've upped their forecast now to roughly 4 to 4.5 million. For 2023. ARK still thinks there's going to be 16 million. Or 26 million.
Yeah, and I've seen that number.
Yeah.
That's not 26 sold in that year. That's like total cumulative sales.
That's sold in that year.
No way.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of these, because I know a lot of the growth in electric vehicles is from China, right? Like 1.2 million of that 1.5 million you mentioned, or maybe like something like that. But a lot of them are smaller, more compact, not something is that right? Or
well, so the interesting thing is that 1.5 million number is mostly cars that we would consider cars.
Wow.
Then there's an additional, almost a doubling of cars that we would not consider cars. And these cars are micro cars. You don't need a driver's license to drive
Yeah.
them in China. They're not using lithium-ion batteries. A lot of them use lead-acid batteries. Right? And so these cars are extraordinarily inexpensive. And they're not really tracked by anyone because there's very little regulation around them. So if you're counting those, then it totally changes the statistics. So when we're looking at it, we're really considering, what you and I would consider a battery electric vehicle.
Wow. And so to get that number right, 26 million EVs sold globally in the year 2023.
That's right.
Okay. Wow. And there's about 90 million cars sold each year. So that's like over a quarter, I
Right.
guess.
Yep. And
Wow.
so then the way we're looking at it and modeling it, you have this battery cost decline. We think that in the early 2020s, you're going to have a electric vehicle be sticker price competitive with a like-for-like gas-powered car.
Yep.
And right, so the thing that I always say is, you come to a dealership and I say, do you want this car that, goes 0 to 60 faster? You don't have as much maintenance costs. Insurance is cheaper. Or do you want this gas-powered car that costs more? And you're going to have to go to the gas station once a week to fill it up. What do you choose as the end consumer?
Yeah, but I almost think people don't give the end consumer enough credit for already factoring in those things like fuel and maintenance savings, which is something that you put out some research, I believe, which like the Model 3, like the Toyota Camry, what does it cost? 25 grand versus a 40,000 Model 3. So the sticker price is very different, but the total cost of ownership is much more similar when you factor in these savings. And I thought one interesting tidbit from the shareholder meeting was that 63% of Model 3 purchases were turning in non-premium cars. So I think, this whole theory of like, oh, when the sticker price changes, that's when the inflection point will happen. I actually think it's already kind of happening because it's the biggest purchase consumers are making and they're really putting in the research. And I think that's part of, like, we're seeing that in the data. So I'm curious if you could comment on, what kind of numbers are you getting to and how do you get that total cost of ownership comparison?
Sure. So when we're looking at total cost of ownership, really you're just factoring in all the costs. So, the big costs are the cost of the vehicle and depreciation. You have the insurance costs, you have the maintenance costs. And I think a really interesting component is the resale value, right? So this comes into the depreciation factor.
Oh, yeah.
And, so we're taking Kelley Blue Book's estimates, and they have the Model 3 retaining a huge amount of value. And that's been true for Tesla vehicles over time. They typically retain value better than their gas-powered counterparts.
Is that just because there's a supply issue where people just want a Tesla and there's not that many of them? Or is there something inherently about the product and the technology that's leading to that?
So I think it's actually probably a bit of both. So definitely, I think supply constrained, and that's contributing to it. But then another thing, that we've done research on is looking at, what's the residual value of a battery pack? And you can cut this in a number of different ways. A lot of companies out there, I think BMW, Nissan are repurposing batteries for stationary energy storage.
Yeah.
And so we've put out research on that saying, if you're going to sell this battery from a Model S into a capacity market, it could be worth more than an entire, internal combustion engine vehicle over its lifespan. But then you also have, we've discussed this with other people, and once recycling becomes more efficient for battery packs, instead of putting it into stationary energy storage, it might be more economic to actually recycle the raw materials, put it into a higher energy density pack, and then sell that again. Wow. So I think those two things are really coming into play. And also just, less wear and tear. A lot of maintenance has to go into an internal combustion engine to keep it running. I think Tesla's really proving out that this electric drivetrain is pretty robust.
Yeah. And actually, I want to get sidetracked for a second because the second life battery thing is really interesting. Because first little story is I was in Detroit last week at Rivian, and they were telling me about this new partnership where they're recycling all their second life batteries, giving them to Puerto Rico, I believe, for like one project. But they were talking about how that's going to be a big piece of their business, which I thought was interesting. And the other thing is I was at Monroe and Associates where they tore down the Model 3, and they were saying how hard it was to get rid of the Model 3 battery pack and actually replace it. Elon Musk tweeted something that said this was wrong, but I'm curious, like, does your research show they can replace the Model 3 battery pack easily or recycle it? And I look at Tesla as a very unique leadership position here because they put so many more BEVs on the road than anyone else that they're going to be the first real one to have this problem or opportunity with all these second hand battery packs. So I kind of wonder, how easy is it for them to really make use of them, and what's Tesla's game plan going to be?
Yeah, so I think recycling is going to ramp up because just as you said, really no volume amount of EVs has reached its end of life. And so when I was at the Gigafactory originally, they actually were showing, and they're like, oh, this area is a recycling area, but it's not online yet. And so their original plan for recycling was that they were going to recycle cells that failed quality assurance at the end of the production line. And so, so when you're making battery cells, yield's not 100%. And so it's probably in the 95 to higher percent, but you're still losing a small percentage of cells. And what they want to be able to do is say, okay, these cells failed. Let's just put them back at the start of the process, get the raw materials, and start it back. And so I think that's probably initially where they're starting all of their recycling efforts. But I imagine, similar to the way that one of Apple's big recycling programs that they highlighted, I think this was probably just 2 years ago. And they're like, look at how much money we are saving because of the tiny amounts of gold that we're pulling from, all of these iPhones.
Wow.
And so I do think that they're going to keep that in mind because it's obviously going to be a huge amount of value that they can extract from old vehicles.
And J.B. Straubel actually has a startup called Redwood Materials he's involved with that it appears to be securing, I don't know if this is right, securing land in Nevada or something very close to the Gigafactory with the goal of recycling batteries. There's almost nothing out there on this company, but do you have any insight on that? Because I thought that was really something curious is happening there.
Yeah, I think I only have as much as you have. It was a filing, and then some people highlighted it, and I think it's kind of been forgotten from the public mind. But I think it's definitely possible. J.B. Straubel is definitely the expert with batteries at Tesla, so I think there's some potential there.
Yeah, I have a feel like that name Redwood Materials is going to pop back up at some point.
Yeah.
But actually, one other thing you touched on was the insurance, which I briefly wanted to talk about because I've never owned a car myself or bought a car. I live in New York, so I haven't gone through the process of getting my own auto insurance. So I feel a little bit out of my depth here. But Tesla, at a high level, is planning to launch an insurance product. You have cars going more autonomous. Tesla's software connected car, they're getting so orders of magnitude more data than any insurance companies had before. So it seems like there's a huge opportunity here. So I'm wondering if you could just give us your thoughts on, what's Tesla planning there? What's the opportunity?
Sure. So I think what Tesla's seeing right now is that their cars are being mispriced in the insurance field, right? They're the safest car on the road. I think insurance agencies are dinging them, and we have an analyst, Nick Gruss, who's doing work on the insurance side of Tesla as well.
Okay.
And so, so they're getting dinged because they're electric vehicles. And as an insurance company, EVs haven't been around that long, so you don't have that real world data of, this battery pack, how much does it actually cost to replace? And so they're actually getting mispriced based on that fact alone. While in reality, these are safer cars. You have Sentry mode and cameras all around where, a lot of accidents are never reported, right? They're hit and run or something along those lines, a fender bender, and, someone drives off. Now, all of a sudden, Tesla has, the license plate of the person who hit you. And that person can now be tracked down and charged. And you have the camera data. It's no longer a he said, she said type of story, right? So you have that aspect of it. You have autopilot, which is consistently improving and reducing the number of accidents. So I think, they really do have a ton of data and all of this other stuff going for them where, they actually have the real world data for how their battery packs, degrade over time, what it costs them to replace it. And so I think they're going to be able to come out with a very competitive offering that pretty much anyone with a Tesla is going to sign up for.
And do you think this actually generates revenue for the company, or is it more just we're going to make our vehicles even more attractive for purchasing?
I think it could be a slight revenue gain. I mean, I don't think this is going to be the, massive growth driver for Tesla, but I think it's another one of those things where it's, becomes a no-brainer, even more so to do this.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess going back to the battery cells, one thing that I'm really fascinated by is Tesla basically repurposed the cell phone laptop battery, lithium ion battery, and then just scaled it up to a crazy level to put it in electric cars. So this is kind of J.B. Straubel's work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very unique and new type of battery. And it seems like one of the biggest misunderstandings of the growth story is that Tesla's biggest constraint has been the supply of these battery pack cells. That's driving a bunch of product decisions, from not doing the Semi, from dropping off the long range Model 3 because they would rather, if they're going to sell a bigger pack, upsell it to the all-wheel drive. Like there's all these, and they've mentioned that they need to scale battery cell production. That's like their biggest bottleneck right now at the shareholder meeting. So I guess I'm curious, how do you see this playing out? Because I guess it's kind of a loaded question because there's so much Panasonic, Maxwell,
Right.
But how do you think Tesla's solving or approaching that battery cell problem?
So I'd say, Tesla, and then also just broader EV market. If you're serious about electric vehicles, look at who's building these factories, right? You have a lot of automakers out there who said, yeah, we're going to do electric and this and that, and, don't back it up with, oh, and this is how we're going to make the actual battery packs, right? That's an important piece. You have, a company like VW who, after Dieselgate, they're like, oh, we need to change the topic, and they're like investing in Northvolt, which is a battery pack company. They've put out close to $50 billion worth of contracts for EV cells. I think Tesla in particular, you look back, I think this was in 2016, where they said to some small lithium companies, they're like, if you can actually prove that your lithium business is viable, we'll acquire you. Needless to say, that didn't pan out because, a lot of small lithium companies wind up failing as they try and produce or reach scale. But I think, they're very serious about trying to vertically integrate, from mining all the way through vehicle production.
So that wasn't, he said that at the shareholder meeting, mining, we might
Right.
get, that wasn't a joke, you think? Or?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a joke, because he had put out these offers before to these small lithium companies. So I think they are serious about it. There are tales of verticalization gone wrong in the past, but I think, Tesla's proven over time that, they've been able to really leverage verticalization to better products for cheaper prices.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess now I kind of want to dive into the Panasonic thing, because this is like at the forefront of my mind. Is it seems like the tensions between Tesla and Panasonic are kind of rising, and it has something to do with the line wanting to hit 35 gigawatt hours of cell production, but it's not. It was at like 24. And it's just reading in between the lines from comments on Musk, it seems like he's frustrated about that, and that's caused Tesla to either look for a different supplier or figure out a different way to do this, kind of hedge their supply for battery cells. So I'm curious, is that what you're reading too, or how do you think about the relationship between them?
Yeah, so I think that came up, but I actually think that probably the bigger tension is Gigafactory 3 in Shanghai, right? So you have all of this news coming out, but really, I think it's all negotiations about Gigafactory 3. Tesla's not said anything really about who they're going to partner with. I think they're definitely going to include other people beyond Panasonic. I think that's important for their business to have a diversity of suppliers, whether that's themselves also trying to get into it somewhat with mining as well, or technology from Maxwell. But I really think a lot of it is this negotiation around Gigafactory 3. Tesla's probably going to need to have a local Chinese player who's going to be a provider, because, that's one of the big things in China, is to have a domestic battery player be a part of it. So, the big one there is CATL.
Yeah.
But there are some others. And there's actually a report today saying that, Beijing is allowing foreign battery manufacturers to start selling in China again.
Wow.
Right. So
I guess Panasonic maybe could be involved.
Right. So then Panasonic could be involved there. So I think it's a pretty complex situation. And then I also think it goes to where the value accrues in the battery supply chain. Right. So you have the cells themselves, which are, I would argue, are getting commoditized. Right. It's kind of a race to the bottom as far as price. There is some chemistry differences, but really I think the value accrues to who's making the battery pack. And so that's Tesla. Tesla's the one who's, doing the active cooling, is running the software, and all of these things. And, I think this is true for when you look at like the Chevy Bolt. It's like, this is an LG car. LG is making the battery pack. That's like, is this your car and you're not making the engine, right? Then that's not your car. So I think that's an important aspect. And then if you look even further down the line and you're saying over-the-air updates, how are you going to actually impact the performance of this vehicle? If you're not the one making the battery pack, it's pretty hard to bring all of these disparate pieces together and have the software work seamlessly. So I do think, this battery pack layer is going to be very important for anyone who's, building an electric vehicle for the future.
Fascinating. And it's when I was with Sandy Monroe last week at lunch, we were talking about this, and he was like, yeah, the Bolt is 70% of the parts is all from LG. He was verifying the same thing. With Tesla, he said like at least 90% of everything is done in-house. So it's just a total reversal of how the supply chain actually works there, which is pretty incredible. All right, well, I guess we can get into Maxwell now, because that's something that I've been researching a ton into, and I think the dry battery electrode technology, just to bring everybody up to speed a little bit, is this new way to basically build lithium-ion cells. You don't need these drying ovens because it's not a wet solvent; it's a dry solvent, which means a vastly smaller footprint. Also, at the same time, a more efficient cell that can last longer, that can be done for cheaper. So sort of a little bit of a breakthrough there, it seems like, for me. And then I think we're going to get a lot more about this on the Tesla Battery and Powertrain Investor Day. But I'm sort of curious, do you have any high-level thoughts of why did Tesla buy Maxwell, and what do you think they're going to do there?
Sure. So I think, one, Maxwell is a pretty cheap acquisition. It's like $220 million. I think it was all stock as well. Mm-hmm. And right, so the crazy thing is anyone could have bought this company.
That was one of my questions,
right?
Is why did no one else?
Right, no one else bought this company because no one else is building battery factories, right? You look at really any other OEM, do we want to spend $220 million on this project that we're kind of doing just because, we need to meet regulations for clean cars? Right, maybe not. But I think, Tesla has the expertise, they have the experience, they've kind of seen how the sausage is made, and they see this as an area for, I think, incremental improvement. I think that's the thing with battery technology is, it's always incremental. It's very hard, not to say that there never will be a breakthrough, but, history's kind of been full of promises and then broken promises for battery breakthroughs. And so I think even with this dry electrode technology, even if they just cut out, $5 per kilowatt hour off the cost, that's huge, right? Because you look at Tesla and let's say they make 500,000 cars, each one's 75 kilowatt hours, then you save $5 per kilowatt hour, you've just paid for that acquisition. And so I think, this is part of their incremental approach to getting cheaper and cheaper battery cells.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like the vertical integration really paid off because that's why the ROI for purchasing Maxwell was accelerated because they had more cars to spread that kilowatt advantage across. Mm-hmm. And I think the other part, what you said about the acquisition, my kind of theory on that is like, you're buying Maxwell for $250 million, which is a ticket to spend another couple billion or hundreds of millions on more CapEx to get vertically integrated. So it's like you're paying money to spend more money, mm-hmm. So I think that's part of like, you're going to pitch that to the executive, and Tesla built up for 3 quarters. My understanding is Tesla built up the machinery to actually build these cells, brought in their own chemistry, was testing them, and there was like a no solicitation clause when the acquisition was done. So you're going to have to come in without doing any of that DD and write the check. And it was just too much, and with only a couple weeks time. And that's why no one did. But I want to throw this like kind of conspiracy theory at you because, so the dry electrode technology, Maxwell's main business is ultracapacitors, mm-hmm. and they were using the same dry manufacturing process to build the ultracaps. And there's a company called CRRC, China Railroad Corporation, which was using their ultracaps to do regenerative braking on these super high-speed trains. They were super impressed by it, or this is kind of how I'm reading in between the lines. But an interesting tidbit, I was talking to a Maxwell shareholder, is part of that production process was in this facility in Arizona where they were actually doing sort of the secret sauce of the, I guess, electrode, or I'm a little out of my depth here, but then shipping all of these ultra caps to China after doing the secret sauce part of the process in Arizona, and they're super protective of it. Then a year later, or even a couple months later, China tries to put $50 million to Maxwell, gets blocked by the Center for CFI US, and then 6 months later, Tesla buys them, now building the Gigafactory in Shanghai, where they could potentially export that technology that the government blocked. Or anyway, so I hope this makes sense. But the crux of the issue here is, my understanding is the secret sauce of this breakthrough, the dry battery electrode, is in how they make that electrode. So my big question is, do they just do that at Gigafactory 1, or are they going to take that secret sauce technology and move it to Gigafactory 3 Shanghai?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd imagine that they're going to utilize the best technology at all of their factories. Maybe it's something similar where they do something in the U.S. to try and protect intellectual property. But I definitely, we also talk about the ultra capacitors a lot as well, saying, potentially for the next super roadster, right? You could use them for insane acceleration. Right, we already have Musk saying there's going to be the SpaceX package or whatever that's going to use the thrusters, but you could also use ultracapacitors in such a way that you have, this huge amount of power over a short amount of time to drive acceleration. But I do think Tesla wants the best product for all of their consumers, so they're going to distribute the technology where they can.
Yeah. And I also was thinking, what about the regenerative braking of the semi-truck? Is that something where because I've getting a ton of comments on people flip-flopping, is that used the ultra caps or not? Do you have any guesses on that?
Yeah, I would, when you were just describing it to me, I was like, oh, that would make sense for the semi-truck.
Yeah.
Because really the biggest limit on regenerative braking is the power of the motors, right? So you can only recap as much energy as the motor is when it's running in reverse. Right. So, if the motor is not strong enough and these trucks are huge and they're going downhill, so maybe you need something to capture that peak amount of energy to feed it back into the system. So I think that's definitely a possibility.
Interesting. And kind of, I guess, taking a step back to get out of the weeds, I'm curious, I sort of like to be conservative in the valuation of Tesla and say, okay, we have this autonomy piece and potential, but let's just talk about the BEV business alone. What do you think is not even battery storage, but how do you see this evolving, in the next 5 or 10 years, Model 3, Model Y, Semi, and do you see upside in Tesla's share price just based on that BEV piece of the business?
Yeah, so at ARK, we've put out our valuation, and even if you don't include the autonomous piece, we think that Tesla could double just on its EV business alone. And so this is really driven just by, just to simplify it to its purest point is, top line unit sales and gross margin. And so, a lot of, I don't know why, but throughout the history of Tesla, kind of the bear thesis has jumped around. When they can't produce cars, the bear thesis is Tesla's never going to be able to scale. They don't have the expertise. So, it's a niche player. Then Tesla starts to scale production, and then the bear thesis shifts to there's no demand, right? And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And I think, the numbers speak for themselves, saying that, they are supply constrained. Musk has come out a number of times and said that you look at their market share for the past, since 2013, their market share, global market share of the electric vehicle market has stayed at 17%, which is crazy, as the market's grown 11x.
Wow.
Right? So, I think the data speaks for itself that they are supply constrained. And then, then the bear thesis jumps to, oh, they're going to run out of cash. They're not going to, have the capital to produce these vehicles. In our valuation framework, we actually have them raising $10 billion from the equity markets.
Wow.
To, scale production. So, that's kind of our framework and how we're thinking about Tesla just as an electric vehicle business.
And so when you do that 26 million 2023, how much, what millions is Tesla? I guess this is probably in your model, but I'm just kind of curious of that back of the napkin. Is Tesla selling 1.5 million of those basically? And, how much revenue does that translate to and how much operating income?
Right. So the way that we think about it, so Tesla's had 17% market share since 2013. And in our lower side guidance going forward, 2023, they lose 2/3 of their market share.
Wow.
So that'd be roughly 1.7 million of that 26. So that's like a 6% market share.
Okay.
Right. So, they come down to a, normal automaker type market share. And then, what was the follow-up question on that?
I mean, I guess I'm just kind of curious. 1.7 million, you could times it by some ASP.
Right.
We're looking at like
50,
100 billion,
right.
70 billion in revenue,
yeah,
something like that.
So we're assuming like a $50,000 average selling price. Then you're looking at, what type of vehicles are in play at that time. You probably have the S, the X, you have the 3, you have the Y, and, we don't even really account that much for the Tesla Semi, but that will probably be in production as well.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of pushback that we've gotten on this is saying, okay, 26 million, that's way too high of a number. One, we don't think so. We think the forecasts have been wrong and are still wrong on the conservative side. But when you look at the market, I think, you have to realize that it's dynamic. This can take off and be a big pie, and Tesla has a small slice of it. Or it can be a smaller pie, and Tesla could have a much bigger slice of it. And so that's kind of what we've seen in the United States. Tesla's share of the electric vehicle market in the U.S. in 2018, 80%. Right?
Yeah.
So smaller overall pie, but a much larger slice. To be conservative, we're not assuming that it's a huge pie and they get a big slice, right? We're assuming they lose 2/3 of their market share.
Yeah. And it's been incredible to watch that there's, the Model 3, I think in May outsold the Bolt like 10-1, but it's priced at like double the selling price. That's the number 2 non-Tesla EV. So it's like Tesla, we have EV market share rising here in the US. It's like single-handedly driven by Tesla. So they're almost, I don't know. I just think that's kind of an incredible fact when you look at it.
Right. And then I think, the pickup. Oh, I didn't even mention the pickup. That could be huge.
Yeah.
Right? I'm definitely excited to see what that's going to look like.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, so then I think, right, you got the SUV as well. And all of a sudden, this is like the biggest market for
the
cars.
Model Y, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. The Model Y. It's amazing the Model 3's done so well. It's kind of like sucked the air out of the room and drawn air from other segments as well. But then, they come out with the SUV. This is kind of the bread and butter of the auto industry.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be really exciting to see how the Model Y does. And, you're going to get all of these people who didn't even look at the Model 3 because maybe that's the starting point of your decision process, right? Do I want an electric car? Maybe that's the start for a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, it's, okay, do I want a sedan? Do I want an SUV? Do I want a pickup truck? And now all of a sudden, people who start that way, now they have the Model Y to choose from.
And believe me, I'm super excited about the Model Y, but one thing I kind of push back on, and I've seen this time and time again be a reason why people misunderstand Teslas, because they put it in this box of like, the Model S is a luxury sedan. No luxury sedan has captured more than 12% market share of the market. So therefore, even in the best case, they'll capture 12% of this tiny market. That's how we get to 10,000 unit sales a year. It's capped. And they're like saying it like it's science. But I think that the mindset of the Tesla, like people are only buying the cars because there's just these like really incremental iterations from automakers. When you have a huge new product disruption like the Model 3, it's going to change consumer preferences. It's going to change how the entire landscape looks. So I think just because CUVs are the best selling cars, to me, that's not indicative of really what consumers want. It's just what they want the most at that time. And so I think my theory is that the Model 3 will do better than people expect because it was the only EV out there, and maybe the Model Y doesn't crush it relative to the CUV segment because that's less of the reason people are actually buying it. But anyway, that's just a little sidetrack. But the other thing I was curious about when you're talking is the S and X refresh. Or this is kind of like a taboo subject because I've been predicting it forever, and I still think it's like closer than ever. But do you have any thoughts on is that coming or?
It does sound like it's coming. They made the incremental step with the motor, using the Model 3 motor now.
Raven?
Right, exactly. And, this is something that we've also been talking about a lot internally is it makes sense for the S and the X to switch over to the Model 3 battery pack. That makes a lot of sense from our perspective, right? Like, why not? This would simplify a lot of your production. You've optimized for the gigafactory. Why not also convert these such that they can utilize that? Musk has come out a number of times and said, S and X are on the 18.
Yeah, is that what you mean when you battery pack? You get the 2170 cells, right? Yeah.
Right. So to us, it makes a lot of sense to switch over. I also think that part of the refresh, and this is a tiny thing, and this goes back to Tasha's work, is to have the interior camera in the S and the X.
Oh yeah, it's like right above.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because right now it's in the 3. But if all of your cars are going to be autonomous, you want that in every single car. So I think that's like a small but important piece
for Tesla insurance too, maybe. So
for Tesla insurance,
really interesting.
Right.
And then they're also like the HVAC system, and I think the Model 3 touchscreen has like a different chip. I don't know if they're still using that. There's like a couple little things like that where if I was like really geeking out on Tesla product specs, like, the Model 3 is better even though it's cheaper. So that to me has really always bugged me about like, and I just feel like a refresh could ignite demand of 150,000 units a year. Like, this is their cash cow business, really improve the cash flow profile of Tesla significantly. So that's kind of why I've been so excited about it.
Right. And then there's also the speculation that they move them to the same line, right? To the same production line. So they free up space in Fremont for the Y.
Wow. So S and X are already on a combined line, but you're saying make it even like the same line as the 3 potentially?
I don't think the same line as the 3. I think right now there's still some separate parts of it at Fremont. And I think they're going to try and consolidate it further.
Oh, gotcha.
Such to free up space.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And one thing that you mentioned about like this cost curve of EVs, right? Tesla selling however many millions. What do you think about the Model 2? The Model 2 to me is the car Elon Musk mentioned most in depth, I believe, on the MKBHD interview about $25,000 car. Basically, what the Model 3 was to the Model S, but let's compact it and make it even cheaper with the next iteration of battery tech, 2022, 2025. Do you think about that much? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that would be a killer car, right? Then forget it, right? That's the car where it's sticker price cheaper.
Yep.
Game over, really. Right? You get the Halo car with the Roadster, and then you hit the mass market. So, something like that would be great. Because originally, Musk had come out and said, Model 3 is the cheapest car we're going to make. And I think depending on what happens with autonomous, that might be true. And that could determine whether or not the Model 2 ever gets made.
Really? Yeah, I think it's great you mentioned that, because that's like the trade-off. Like, does it make sense, or is everything going autonomous? And really interesting. And one thing I wanted to switch to is the peaker plants, sort of battery Powerwall side of the business, because this is something you just put out a note on, which I thought was great. And one thing at the shareholder meeting that I took away was Drew, the new guy working with JB Straubel on the tech side, was like, okay, it's great that we validate electric vehicles, we're all clapping, but what nobody's really talking about is we validated the same technology for the peaker plants, for the grid applications. This is the other beast of Tesla's business that's kind of brewing in the background. Once again, battery cell production probably constraining it, but what do you think about the Powerwall business and the opportunity there?
Right. So I think there's the cut between Powerwall and then the utility scale, right? So I think
Powerwall, Powerpack, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so the Powerwall residential, I think it's interesting and it's growing. But I think you've already seen Tesla's priority is, they've shifted packs that were going to go to them, use them for vehicles. So I think their priority is the auto business. And that's, when we're looking at the valuation, we're focusing on this. Although, the energy storage business could be a great tailwind. The utility side, I think, is particularly interesting because if you look at, peaker plants, what these are is, summer day, it's hot, we all go home and we turn on our air conditioning at the exact same time. And so, you turn on these peaker plants and maybe they run for, 2 days a year, right? So, we need to have them. Otherwise, there'd be rolling blackouts. But, it's a lot of money for a low utilization plant. And so, all of a sudden you're like, well, why not use this battery? You can do load leveling during the day. so that, you charge it at night when electricity costs are low. You discharge it during those peak times. You can use it daily instead of, twice a year. It responds instantaneously or nearly instantaneously as opposed to having to be spun up. And so the news that just came out was GE is shutting down a peaker plant, natural gas plant, 20 years early.
Wow.
Right? So this is crazy. Why shut down a plant 20 years early? Because it's not economic to keep it running, right? So it's actually cheaper to shut down this plant than to keep it running. And interestingly, they're selling it to a company that I think is going to use it for energy storage.
Wow. And one thing you didn't even mention there is the batteries, instead of bringing up a really dirty power source online that you didn't even have to have if you had stored the energy you're previously wasting in a battery. Mm-hmm. So that's what gets me so excited about. I'm like, why do we have these extra power plants that are like, natural gas that we don't need to burn that we're burning? Like, that seems really inefficient and bad for just the carbon output situation.
Right. I mean, but then, regardless of the power pack, it has to get charged somehow. So it could be renewable, or it could be natural gas, or whatever, is being used to produce electricity. I think that's a good point you bring up, though, is because, that's another argument against EVs. Oh, they're dirtier because, coal is being used to produce the electricity. All you have to do is look at the trend, and you see that overall grids are getting much cleaner. So it's, kind of ridiculous to look at and say, oh, it's always going to be like this, right? It's actually changing pretty rapidly towards cleaner. So I think that's an important piece of information to have.
Totally. And even beyond the feel-good green part, which gets me excited, but that's not what's moving the industry, is these batteries are now becoming economical because of that Wright's law. Mm-hmm. We've had now that inflection point is starting to pass where the most lowly utilized peaker plants are getting, actually is an ROI to be like, let's just build a battery. And was hugely validated with the Australia project that Tesla had, their biggest one in the world at the time, 129 megawatt hours. And then in your note, you mentioned about 2 gigawatt hours between two projects that PG&E did, and that Elon Musk has mentioned. So that's like, these are real world applications of this really being validated. So how big is that opportunity for Tesla and just, this peaker plant thing as it kind of evolves?
So we think the total addressable market for utility energy storage is about 800 billion. So it's pretty big. Not as big as the auto, or definitely not as big as the autonomous opportunity, but definitely sizable. And Tesla's mentioned it before. This is ramping quickly for them. They think energy storage sales are going to be twice what they were, if not 3 times what they were last year. And then I also think this just speaks to the battery technology. Is, no one thought you could have a battery this big, right? You go back 5 years. If you would have said we're going to have a gigawatt hour battery, people would have said, what are you talking about, right? Like, this is impossible. There's way too much complications. But, here we are. The project in Australia has been tremendously successful.
And it excites me because it feels like we've gone 0 to 1, mm-hmm. And now it's just 1 to N about scaling the cell production. And so that's kind of why I'm excited about it, because you don't see it on the financials anywhere. Nobody's talking about it. But the hard part of validating the technology that it works and convincing big companies like PG&E has been done. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of one of this big theme I see with Tesla. I'm like, also what they're doing with the Shanghai Gigafactory, Model 3 production line 2.0, way less CapEx. The financial rewards from all of their technologies and R&D, we're just so far away from realizing it on the financial and income statement, cash flow statement. So that's why I just feel like you're looking in the rearview mirror if you're reading the financials, not looking at the kind of technology sign. So I don't know. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that? This disconnect seemingly between the media and, you're nodding your head. So
Yeah. No, I think there's a big disconnect. But then I also think there's a disconnect between us and the rest of the country. You and I are in the Tesla bubble, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I go on Twitter and I see Tesla bulls and bears nonstop. I talk to everyone and they know what Tesla is. But, I travel and I mention Tesla and people have so little information. And it's like, it always blows my mind. It's just like, oh wow, it's like this is my job. I talk about this nonstop. But I think the information still needs to spread to a lot of people, and a lot of people still just read that one or two posts in the media, and they're like, oh, are these cars dangerous? They're catching on fire, and you're like, no, they're actually less likely to catch on fire than a gas powered car. So I still think there's this huge disconnect between what you and I see and what the mass public sees, and then also what Wall Street sees. So I think it's pretty fragmented as far as the picture people paint of Tesla in their mind.
Yeah, the car fire one's really funny to me because my roommate, I don't want to throw Leo under the bus here, but he was talking about the Tesla fires and like other cars don't catch on fire. And then I'm like, dude, Google it. And we Google it and it's like BMW's recalling all these cars. And it's like, so if you just do like 1 second of research, you see how different the actual like reality is from the perception and the narrative, which is crazy to me. So I guess I kind of was wondering, we're so bullish on Tesla and excited. Where does this go wrong? When would ARK start to change its thesis? What leading indicators are you looking at to say, now we're less bullish?
So I think that's a great question. Demand is important. Obviously, you have to be able to sell the cars. And, this also gets into competition. But we actually think competition at this point is a good thing. The biggest surprise to us, I would say, is how little competition there is. We would have expected there to be more competition at this point. And, right, people say, oh, Porsche comes out with the Taycan and it's going to destroy demand for the S and the X. But, the way that we look at it is if Porsche or Audi or Jaguar is selling an electric vehicle, they need to convince their customer, their lifelong Porsche, Jaguar, Audi customer, that electric is better than gas, right? That's how you make that sale. And that's great. That's great for the EV industry as a whole. It's also great for Tesla. Once someone's decided to go electric, then their next car, they're going to be comparing electric vehicles. And we think Tesla can stand on their own from that front. I think scaling battery production is a risk for not just Tesla, but the industry as a whole, right? So I think one of the biggest risks to our EV forecast, that 26 million, is the supply side of it, right? How quickly can you scale these factories? And, when we were originally doing the research, we're like, okay, you probably need 3 years between announcement and first cars rolling off. But, the Shanghai 3 is kind of throwing that a little bit into the wind.
Yeah.
Right? This has gone up, I think, faster than most people have anticipated. Obviously, we can say that for sure once a car comes off the line, because you never know. But at this rate, it looks like it could be 1 year, which is pretty remarkable. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest threat is scaling up the battery supply.
And who do you think would be a threat? Because I've been, like you said, nobody's investing in the battery production, putting their money where their mouth is. So I'm kind of like, I don't really see, I'm trying to figure out, I'm very impressed with Rivian, what they're doing, but I don't really see them as a threat to Tesla for a while. Volkswagen seems to have woken up and be putting a ton of money. Who are you, is it NIO, someone in China? Who do you think could be a threat?
Yeah, so I think in China, with NIO, we've heard some mixed quality issues on the battery packs there.
Yeah.
So I don't think necessarily NIO. And I think, as you said, near term, it's not really anyone. Tesla's ahead, we think 3 years ahead on battery technology, autonomous hardware, and autonomous data collection. I think longer term down the road, you will have people catch up, but it's kind of like any industry. It's like you look at the iPhone, people eventually caught up, but you still have one company that's, clearly market leader. And so, VW is one. I think, in China you have BAIC and BYD, who are actively going after it and, know the local market. Obviously, China likes local players as well. Right? That's another risk potential for Tesla is, China's a very difficult market for a non-local to be in. So, that's something that we take into account and, would evaluate very closely on how that's actually working out for them.
Yeah, I feel like people aren't appreciating how different this situation with China is for Tesla. It's the first wholly owned factory by a foreign company. I saw like not only are they helping finance it, but they just offered this like 0% interest rate for 60 months from the Pudong Bank. They're really pushing it to make it very, very successful, which is I've never seen anything like this.
Yep. And I think it really speaks to how serious China is about electric vehicles. Right? If you're going to be a leader, and this is, we were speaking to a company in China, and it's like China is a technological world leader. I think you really can't deny that anymore. You look at their AI research, they're right there with the United States. You look at what they're doing with, pretty much everything. But then you look at the auto industry, and it's like this is an area that they have not cracked, right? They have not been able to export cars globally. And that's something that they want to do. They want to be a global leader in all technology. And I think, how do you do that? And I think they are right. They're focusing on the future, which is electric. And so I think their grand ambition would be to become an exporter of vehicles. Whether or not that happens, still very much up in the air. But I think that's really a big part of what's driving them to be so ambitious with electric.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that they want to be an exporter of vehicles, because I think that just sums up through the lens of like exactly how you need to be looking. Why are they pushing so hard? Why do they want so many EV companies? Like it just makes so much sense. So, okay, last question, kind of a weird moonshot that I have, but I think very important to ARK's thesis, is that China, when I went there, or we went there actually with Kevin, and like what we noticed is what I thought was so crazy is their green license plates versus blue license plates. So the green ones, EVs have green ones, and that's just like one of the incentives. You can get your license plates easier. There's no fees. Like the government is adding up between $10,000 or $15,000 of incentives per EV, and I think these are going down or maybe winding down. But that's just an example of like Paris is banning ICE cars, or France is banning ICE cars. Spain, all these countries, every single country it seems like, except for the U.S. So I guess my point is, it seems like the pendulum here, and I don't want to get political but I'm just trying to be analytical about the political situation, which is the pendulum has swung to, we want to give basically zero incentives to EVs. Once the $200,000 tax credit runs out, it's just a free market. But I think what I'm seeing geopolitically across the world is, and I think it's just education. People are waking up to the fact this is a positive ROI for governments and taxpayers to make over the long term to subsidize EVs and accelerate this adoption. And I think if a Democrat gets elected, or someone that's more in favor with that ideology in the U.S. government, the pendulum swings back. We could have a huge new sort of regulatory catalyst for the electric vehicle space, which I think makes perfect sense to me. Have you thought about that? Because that to me could provide a huge tailwind for your 26 million number, or at least in the U.S. piece of it.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do in all of our modeling is we exclude subsidies completely. Kind of for the exact reason that you said is, these things can change extraordinarily rapidly, right? One decision, and then, cut subsidies, create subsidies. Politics are very hard to predict, I think, as we've all seen. So that's not what we try and predict. We just try and predict using technological cost declines, which are very robust unit economics. And so that's really what's driving our forecast. It's possible that you get certain political swings that could either help or hurt. But we really try and be agnostic to that because, we stick to the things that we think are our core competency with actually forecasting. But, I do think it's, you mentioned subsidies. I think this has been a huge mental barrier to forecasting agencies around the world with electric vehicles, because the whole demand argument still kind of hangs up on that point, is saying, oh, EVs are still subsidized. What happens when it goes away? Right? And it's like, okay, but how about we just look at the fact that, subsidies were cut in half and Tesla absorbed that cost and pretty much maintained its margins.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Like, what happened? Oh, well, they were able to make cars cheaper. And, then they're going to get rid of the final subsidy. And, costs are still going to come down because that's how technology works, right? For the most part, costs continue to come down. And then eventually, there's nothing left to say, oh, this is why EVs are going to be a niche technology.
Mm-hmm. And I love that philosophy of we don't want to rely on subsidies for it to win. And like I've held that very strong belief with Tesla. Like they need to be competing with ICE cars with no subsidies if this is a real, legitimate, huge business. But the thing that I keep getting hung up on is if we're accurately pricing the negative externalities of the life cycle of an ICE vehicle versus an EV vehicle, then it's not being accurately priced. So I don't know if they're going to follow the science eventually or price that in, but I actually think Tesla has a headwind against it that is not being accurately priced in because of this. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting kind of thought exercise.
Yeah, I think there's tons of externalities that are not being priced appropriately, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But anyway, on that note, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I had so much fun talking about Tesla. Sam from ARK, if you have any shout outs, or I'll put the link right here so people can follow you on Twitter. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great being here. Definitely reach out on Twitter. We're happy to answer questions. Love to, get insightful feedback or anything great out there. So look forward to coming back and doing another one after Battery Day.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you so much. Peace.
See ya.